How humans survived illness. Before modern medicine this morning, you probably did something so ordinary that you barely noticed it. Maybe you woke up with a sore throat. Maybe your head felt a little heavy. Maybe you felt the first signs of a fever creeping in. Without thinking much about it, you walked to a cabinet, opened a bottle, swallowed a pill, and continued with your day. A few hours later, you were probably feeling better, problem solved. But have you ever stopped to wonder what would have happened if that pill didn't exist? Not just the pill, everything behind it. No pharmacies, no hospitals, no doctors, no antibiotics, no painkillers, no medical textbooks, no understanding of bacteria, viruses, or infection. Imagine that world for a moment. Now imagine you're standing in it. It is 50,000 years ago. The sun is disappearing behind the horizon. Cold air moves across the landscape. Your body is weak. Every swallow hurts. Your fever is getting worse. You have no idea why. You don't know what germs are. You don't know what disease is. All you know is that people sometimes get sick and never recover. You've seen it happen before. A hunter develops a fever. A child starts coughing. An elder becomes too weak to stand. Then one day they're gone. And in a world where survival depends on every member of the group, sickness isn't just dangerous, it threatens everyone. Yet despite all of this, humanity survived. For hundreds of thousands of years, long before modern medicine, long before science, long before civilization itself. How? How did people survive infections when they didn't know bacteria existed? How did they reduce pain without pharmacies? How did they perform surgery without steel tools? And why does the small white tablet sitting in your medicine cabinet today have a direct connection to knowledge discovered thousands of years before the first city was ever built? The answer begins not in a hospital, not in a laboratory, but around a fire, surrounded by people who refused to let each other die. For most of human history, illness was one of the greatest threats a person could face. A broken bone could become infected, a small wound could become deadly, a fever could last days, sometimes weeks, and without treatment, even minor conditions could become fatal. Life expectancy was short. Child mortality was heartbreaking. Many children never lived long enough to become adults. Every family experienced loss. Every tribe understood grief. But ancient humans were not helpless. They were observant. They paid attention. And over thousands of generations, they began noticing something important. Some people recovered, and when they did, there was often a pattern. Certain plants seemed to help, certain behaviors improved survival, certain people knew things others did not. Slowly, painfully, and through countless failures, the first medical knowledge began to emerge. One of the most remarkable discoveries supporting this idea was found inside a cave in northern Iraq. The cave is known as Shanidar, and what archaeologists discovered there completely changed how we think about our ancient relatives, the Neanderthals. Inside the cave were the remains of a man who had lived tens of thousands of years ago. At first glance, his skeleton seemed ordinary, but a closer examination revealed something astonishing. His right arm was missing. He was partially blind. His body showed signs of severe arthritis. Several injuries would have made hunting extremely difficult, perhaps impossible. By every standard of prehistoric survival, this man should have died years earlier, yet he didn't. He survived, not for weeks, not for months, for years, maybe even decades. There is only one reasonable explanation. Someone took care of him. Someone shared food with him. Someone protected him when he could no longer protect himself. Someone refused to leave him behind. That realization transformed our understanding of ancient humanity. The earliest healthcare system in history wasn't built from stone. It wasn't a hospital. It was compassion. Long before medicine, there was caregiving, and that simple act may have helped our species survive, but caring for the sick could only go so far. Sooner or later, people needed something else, a way to fight pain, a way to fight disease, a way to improve the odds of survival, and that search led them into the natural world. Imagine a group of hunter-gatherers moving through a forest. They have no chemistry, no biology, no scientific method, but they do have something incredibly powerful: memory. If someone eats a plant and dies, people remember. If someone eats a plant and recovers, people remember that too. Generation after generation, knowledge accumulates. Mistakes become lessons, lessons become traditions, traditions become medicine. Nature became humanity's first pharmacy. Nature became humanity's first pharmacy. And one of the most fascinating pieces of evidence comes from a man who died more than 5,000 years ago. Today we know him as Ötzi the Iceman. In 1991, two hikers crossing the Alps discovered what appeared to be a body sticking out of the ice. At first they assumed it was a recently deceased mountaineer, but they were wrong, very wrong. The man had been frozen for over 5 millennia. His clothing, weapons, tools, and even the contents of his stomach were preserved with extraordinary detail. It was like opening a time capsule from a world long gone. As scientists carefully examined his belongings, they found something unexpected. Ötzi wasn't traveling alone with just hunting gear. He was carrying medicine. Attached to his equipment were pieces of birch polypore mushroom. At first glance, they didn't seem important, but laboratory analysis revealed something remarkable. The mushrooms contained compounds with antibacterial properties, anti-inflammatory properties, and substances known to fight intestinal parasites. Then researchers made another discovery. Ötzi himself suffered from intestinal parasites. Suddenly, the mystery made sense. These mushrooms were not decorations, they were treatment. 5,000 years ago, a traveler crossing dangerous mountain passes carried a medical kit. Not because he understood microbes, not because he had studied biology, but because generations of accumulated knowledge had taught people which natural remedies worked. And Ötzi was not unique. Evidence suggests humans had been experimenting with medicinal plants for tens of thousands of years before he was born. In Spain, researchers studying ancient Neanderthal dental plaque made a surprising discovery. Trapped within the hardened plaque were microscopic traces of plants, not food plants, medicinal plants. Among them were yarrow and groundsel, plants with known therapeutic properties. The strange thing was that these plants offered very little nutritional value. They were not being eaten because people were hungry. They were being consumed because they served another purpose. Someone had learned that they helped, and that knowledge survived long enough to leave traces inside the teeth of individuals who lived more than 50,000 years ago. Think about that for a moment. 50,000 years. That's longer than recorded history, longer than agriculture, longer than cities, longer than writing itself. Yet even then, humans were already developing treatments for illness. The roots of medicine stretch far deeper into the past than most people realize. And among all the remedies discovered by ancient people, one would eventually become familiar to almost every person alive today. It came from a tree, the willow tree. Thousands of years before pharmaceutical companies existed, people across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East had discovered something interesting. Chewing willow bark seemed to reduce pain. It helped with fever. It eased inflammation. No one understood why, but they understood the results. Ancient Egyptian medical texts mention it. Traditional healers relied on it. Generation after generation continued using it because experience told them it worked. Then, in the late 19th century, modern science finally uncovered the secret. Willow bark contains a compound called salicin. Inside the human body, salicin is converted into salicylic acid. In 1897, chemists working in Germany successfully synthesized a more stable version of that compound. The result became one of the most famous medicines in human history: aspirin. The next time you open a bottle of aspirin, remember this. You are not using a completely modern invention. You are using the refined descendant of knowledge discovered by people who lived thousands of years before electricity, engines, or written science. The distance between a Stone Age healer and a modern pharmacist is not as large as it first appears. But sometimes plants weren't enough. Sometimes pain became unbearable. Sometimes injuries became severe. And sometimes ancient humans attempted something that seems almost unbelievable. They cut open skulls. Across the world, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a procedure known as trepanation. It is the oldest known surgical operation in human history. The process was horrifying. Using sharpened stone tools, healers carefully scraped, drilled, or cut holes into the skull. No anesthesia, no sterile operating rooms, no modern surgical equipment. Just human hands and stone. For years, researchers assumed such procedures must have been desperate acts with terrible outcomes. Then they looked closer. The skulls told a different story. Around many of the openings, scientists found signs of healing. Bone had regrown. The patients had survived. Some survived for months. Some survived for years. In some regions, survival rat, the healer, the medicine man, the medicine woman. Whatever name a culture gave them, their role was often the same. They stood at the intersection of medicine, memory, and mystery. In a world without books, every piece of medical knowledge existed inside human minds. There were no libraries, no universities, no written records. Everything had to be remembered. Every useful plant, every treatment, every lesson learned from success, every lesson learned from failure. Imagine spending decades observing illness, watching who recovered, watching who died, learning which roots eased pain, which leaves reduced swelling, which mushrooms helped infections. Then imagine teaching all of that knowledge to the next generation before you died. That was the healer's responsibility. In many hunter-gatherer societies, losing a healer was not just losing a person, it was losing an entire medical library. Thousands of observations, thousands of lessons, gone in a single moment. Perhaps that is why healers often held such respected positions within their communities. Archaeological discoveries suggest some were treated with extraordinary honor. One remarkable example comes from the Near East. Researchers studying a burial site dating back roughly 12,000 years discovered the grave of a woman unlike any other at the location. She had been buried with dozens of tortoise shells, animal remains from multiple species, rare ceremonial objects. The burial was clearly special. Researchers believe she may have been a shaman, a healer, someone whose knowledge was considered so valuable that even death did not diminish her importance. She was remembered, honored, preserved. Because communities understood something essential, food keeps people alive today. Knowledge keeps people alive tomorrow, and nowhere was that knowledge more important than during disease outbreaks. One symptom appears again and again throughout human history: fever. For thousands of years, fever terrified people. The body grows hot, energy disappears, sweat pours from the skin. The mind becomes confused. To ancient people, it must have seemed as though a fire had been lit inside the body itself. Yet something interesting appears in many traditional cultures. When someone developed a fever, they were often moved closer to the fire, wrapped in blankets, kept warm, not cooled down, not treated as though heat itself was the enemy. Instead, people allowed the fever to continue. For a long time, modern medicine often took the opposite approach. Doctors worked aggressively to lower body temperature. The assumption was simple: heat must be dangerous, heat must be stopped. But over time, scientists discovered something surprising. In many cases, fever is not the problem, it is part of the solution. A fever is the immune system fighting back. By increasing body temperature, the body creates an environment that makes life more difficult for many pathogens. The heat is not always harmful, sometimes it is a weapon. Ancient people did not understand immunology. They did not know about white blood cells. They did not know about bacteria. Yet generations of observation taught them something important. People often recovered when their bodies were allowed to fight, not because ancient humans were lucky, but because they paid attention. And perhaps that is the most overlooked part of this story. When we imagine people living 50,000 years ago, we often picture ignorance. We imagine frightened individuals trapped in a dangerous world they could barely understand. But that image is incomplete. Ancient humans were among the greatest observers who ever lived. They had to be. Their survival depended on it. Every mistake carried consequences. Every successful treatment mattered. Every lesson was paid for with real human lives. The truth is that medicine was never born in a laboratory. It was born through observation, through memory, through suffering, through countless generations refusing to stop searching for answers. And the cost was enormous. Researchers estimate that in many ancient hunter-gatherer societies, a significant percentage of children died before reaching adulthood. Infections, disease, malnutrition, accidents. Loss was everywhere. Every family knew grief. Every tribe buried loved ones. Every generation faced dangers we can barely imagine today. And yet humanity endured. Not because ancient life was easy, not because disease was rare, but because people cared for one another, because knowledge survived, because every generation inherited lessons from the generations before it. The man in Shanidar Cave survived because somebody refused to abandon him. Otzi carried medicinal mushrooms because somebody discovered their value. Ancient patients survived skull surgery because healers spent generations refining their techniques. And aspirin exists because thousands of Yi